Welcome to Raccoon Tale. I hope you enjoy your time here and find peace in the stories we tell. If you liked the story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to support the channel. I am a vicious woman. I've committed every evil deed imaginable, sins piled upon sins. My husband loathes me to the bone. Yet after I died, he sat before my coffin throughout the entire night, his eyes red and swollen, muttering endlessly, "In the next life, be a good person. Don't be so wicked anymore." I found it laughable. If given another chance, how could a villainess like me possibly transform into a virtuous woman? After my rebirth, my methods compared to my past life have only grown more ruthless, not less. Yet why has my husband, you who were once as pure as autumn wind and bright moon, begun to show signs of remorse? The capital's foremost talented lady, Autumn Lee, and I were once celebrated as the most renowned pair of confidantes in the imperial city. Yet recently, I've constantly found excuses to avoid seeing her. Ruby and Jade found it puzzling. Recently, Miss Lee has visited frequently. Why does young Miss keep making excuses about illness and refuse to meet her? I casually flipped through the account books, lifted the teacup beside me, took a sip, and answered coldly, "She brings bad luck. What's worth meeting?" Ruby hesitated. "Aren't you and Miss Lee chamber friends?" I focused my gaze on the rows of numbers in the ledger. Every entry of how father had secretly used Song Manor's silver to support the Lim Manor was crystal clear. The corners of my mouth couldn't help but curve upward as I laughed. Chamber friends. So what? To speak truthfully, she and I are actually blood sisters. Autumn's mother, Serena Wang, was originally my mother's cousin. Before her marriage, she often came to Song Manor to visit. Once, then twice. Gradually she developed feelings and had a secret affair with father. At that time, father hadn't yet passed the imperial examination. Song Manor had been in decline for many years. They coveted the dowry mother brought with her. Grandmother chose to cover up the matter to preserve face. Serena was arranged to marry one of father's subordinates. When she wed, she was already pregnant with Autumn. If they truly wanted to conceal this matter, they could have kept it hidden for life, preventing mother from ever knowing. However, Serena deliberately whispered beside mother's ear while attending her during childbirth, "Why don't you look closely and see if she and Autumn don't resemble each other greatly?" How could mother have imagined that her husband would do such filthy things with her beloved cousin right under her nose? That year I was 8 years old, standing outside the silk curtain, planted there like a fixture. I watched as Serena leaned down and whispered something into mother's ear. Mother struggled to prop herself up, looked at me once, then spat out a mouthful of fresh blood. That day she suffered a difficult labor with hemorrhaging, 1 body, 2 lives lost. Afterward, Serena told me that those words were meant to encourage mother to struggle on for my sake and persevere in living. At the time, I truly believed her. It wasn't until many years later that I learned Autumn's true origins. I sought out the midwife who had assisted mother's delivery back then and finally understood everything. It's only a pity that by then, Serena had already died of illness. But fortunately, I had been reborn. In my previous life, I lived 20 years in the inner courts. Every form of scheming and calculation, I had tasted them all. Revenge, for me, was no difficult matter. I had already used illness as an excuse several times to avoid Autumn. Today she came again with Serena to visit me. Relying on her status as an aunt, Serena frequently came and went from the manor to visit. She was exceptionally skilled at embroidery. It was she who taught me needlework. Having lost mother since childhood, I once sincerely regarded her as someone to rely upon. The more often she visited the manor, the more opportunities she had to secretly meet with father. Back then, I naively thought father's refusal to take another principal wife was because his heart still cherished mother's memory. Little did I know, there had always been someone else occupying his heart. Years ago, when Minister Lee first entered officialdom, his monthly stipend was merely a dozen or so taels of silver. Yet all these years, Serena and Autumn have lived in ease and luxury, adorned with precious things like noble ladies of powerful households. All those beautiful years were thanks to the funds father secretly provided. My gaze lingered momentarily on the exquisitely patterned gold hairpin fastened in Serena's hair. Then I gently raised my handkerchief to my lips, coughed softly once, and signaled for Ruby to serve tea. Autumn lifted the teacup, took a sip, then set it down and frowned. "This tea is old, from last year." Hearing this, I smiled faintly. Sister's palate is truly refined. I can't tell the difference myself. This tea was sent by grandmother. Grandmother said that lately the manor's expenses have been large. All the courtyards must economize. My quarters naturally must tighten the purse as well. Serena also set down her teacup and hastily tried to smooth things over. Mother, weren't you born into the foremost merchant family of Jiangnan? How could you possibly live in want? As she finished speaking, she noticed the half-finished embroidery I'd left on the table and casually picked it up. These few stitches aren't quite skillful yet. Let Aunt fix them for you. I murmured an acknowledgement, then turned to chat with Autumn about several varieties of precious tea recently transported into the capital. The slanting afternoon sun cast its rays, tea smoke curled lazily, and the courtyard was so peaceful it seemed time itself had stopped flowing. I looked at the mother and daughter before me, suddenly smiled, and said slowly, "Actually, in my room I do have good tea. But today, in the pot of tea you've been drinking, I've already added poison." I was afraid to waste good tea, so I brought out the old kind and fell. As the words fell, the room instantly went silent as death, so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Autumn's face immediately froze. What did you just say? Drip, drip. Drops of dark crimson blood fell onto the pure white silk stretched across the embroidery frame, slowly seeping and spreading into streaks. Autumn slowly turned her head to look at Serena beside her. Fresh blood kept flowing from Serena's mouth and nose. I looked at Autumn coldly and said calmly, "She drank more cups of poisoned tea than you did, so naturally the poison takes effect a bit sooner." Autumn clutched her chest, her body going limp as she collapsed to the ground, eyes wide with shock staring at me. You've gone mad. Why would you want to harm us, mother and daughter?" I smiled and looked toward Serena. "You might as well ask your mother why she killed my mother all those years ago." The servant girls who had accompanied them, seeing their mistresses vomiting blood and collapsing, panicked and ran to fetch father. The moment father stepped through the door, he saw me holding a dagger pressed against Serena's throat, coldly demanding, "Speak. Why did you harm my mother?" Serena could no longer form words, only continuously spitting blood from her mouth. Father saw blood covering the ground. His legs went weak and he nearly couldn't stand steady. I slowly turned my head, my gaze resting on him. "Are you afraid now, father? The night mother died in difficult labor, her blood flowed far more than this." He trembled and pointed at me. "Song Camilla, have you lost your mind? Put down the blade immediately." I lowered my hand and sighed softly. She can no longer speak, can't answer anything. But I still have other methods. I stood up straight, walked before father, and gripped the hand he had just extended. In the next instant, the blade sliced a long gash across his palm. At this moment I was like a demon crawling up from hell, my gaze causing even the servants who had followed father to retreat in fear. With the strength of a woman alone, I originally couldn't fight against a grown man, yet he was so terrified that his body went limp, allowing me to easily drag him before Autumn. Blood from his palm flowed down along his wrist, dripping into the pool of blood Autumn had just vomited. I laughed until tears fell. Blood mingling as proof of kinship, so she truly is father's daughter as well. I released his hand, walked before Serena, crouched down facing her, and asked softly, "When mother was in labor, did you tell her about all this? It must have hurt terribly, didn't it? If you're willing to admit it, I'll grant you an easy death." Father scrambled up from the ground, stood behind me, his mouth spewing curses wildly. You truly are an unfilial daughter. You even dare stab your own father. Where did you find such audacity?" Before the words were finished, blood splattered across his face. The blade in my hand had already plunged straight into Serena's neck. Fresh blood spurted out, flowing down along the veins of my hand. She stared wide-eyed at me, her mouth gaping, but unable to produce a single sound. In my previous life, what I regretted most was being unable to personally avenge mother. In this life, I've finally not wasted this second chance at living. Autumn's father, Minister Li, has now climbed his way to the great backing of Prince Heng. His official rank has risen continuously. Currently his position at court is equal to father's. Father naturally doesn't dare offend him. I slowly wiped the blood from the blade and reminded him softly, "Only 2 watches of the night remain before dark. By then, Minister Li will surely send people to search for his wife and daughter. Father can rest assured." When the 2 of them entered Song Manor, no one saw them. There are only witnesses who saw the mother and daughter, dressed nobly, going up the mountain to offer incense and pray for blessings. Father supported his trembling body and struggled to stand, looking at me with eyes full of terror. He hated me so much his teeth ground together, wishing he could kill me on the spot. Yet in the end, all he could do was curse me, while gritting his teeth and helping me clean up the aftermath. The Li mother and daughter, on their way up the mountain to pray, unfortunately encountered mountain bandits. Lady Li, shielding Autumn, took several knife wounds and died from severe injuries. Autumn was fortunate enough to keep her life. When she was carried out of my courtyard, her eyes were bloodshot, filled with hatred as she glared at me. Song Camilla, you must pay with your life for my mother. I only found it ridiculous. In the future, if you dare appear before me even once more, I will expose your true origins. Do you think you'll live long enough to see the day you take revenge? It wasn't until after midnight that father returned his robes, still covered with dust and dried blood. He stormed into the courtyard looking to settle accounts with me, just as I had finished copying the ledgers. He looked at the light silk placed beside me. His eyes bloodshot, his voice hoarse as he demanded, "After committing such wicked deeds, how do you still have the face to keep living? Serena killed my mother. She deserved to die. Why should I pay with my life for a murderer's sake?" I set down my brush, raised my head to look at him. "Father, you've just been crying, haven't you? It seems Serena truly was the one in your heart. No wonder you've spent all these years pouring silver into supporting that mother and daughter." He laughed coldly. "This courtyard is already surrounded completely. Even without that piece of silk, you won't survive until dawn either." I presented the copy of the ledgers I'd just completed before him. "These are the false accounts father has been keeping all these years to provide funds for Serena and her daughter. You want to kill me to silence me, to hide your own crimes. But in this world, there's no wall that doesn't let wind through. If I die..." These account books, together with a handwritten letter detailing how father and Serena had an affair producing an illegitimate daughter and caused mother's death, will immediately be delivered to the censorate. At that time will your official career, your prospects, the reputation of the entire Song clan, even your very life still be secure. Father stared at the pages of accounts, his eyes already filled with utter despair. "So everything today was calculated by you beforehand?" I smiled faintly. "Serena's death was indeed by my hand, but the one who handled the aftermath was you, father. Now we're like two grasshoppers tied to the same string." Father's gaze upon me was both strange and frightened. "Since childhood you were so gentle and kind. How did you suddenly become so ruthless? Why?" Should I really tell him that I've been reborn? Before leaving, he pointed his finger at my face and spat out one sentence. "Venomous woman. You truly are a venomous woman. Venomous woman." How long has it been since I last heard those words? In my previous life, when Dorian Shen strangled me, he cursed me exactly the same way. In my previous life, Dorian fell in love with Autumn at first sight. However, the Shen family was an aristocratic clan of noble lineage. Dorian was the legitimate eldest son expected to inherit. His mother, Princess Yongning, naturally would never accept a family like the Li clan, who only knew how to climb to power through flattery and fawning. On the contrary, the one who caught her eye was me, the one Autumn dragged along as a foil, dressed elegantly, behaving properly. Thus, the Shen Manor sent people to our door seeking marriage. After marrying into the Shen family, Dorian and I once had a period of loving affection. Dorian's official career went smoothly, clouds auspiciously lifting his steps. With the Shen family's support, in just 10 years he rose to the position of Prime Minister. Though married for many years, despite the Shen family's status, the inner courts had never taken in another person. For a long time, I became the object of envy for countless women of the capital. When people asked about it, he would only smile casually and reply, "My wife doesn't permit it." Having finished speaking, he'd remove his outer robe and gently drape it over my shoulders. Yet, when returning to the courtyard, the gentleness in his eyes would immediately vanish. He'd grab my hair and viciously shove my head into the bathing basin. The tearing pain in my scalp forced me to look up and meet his furious face. Dorian gave a cold smile. "Song Camilla, does sitting in the position of the Shen family's principal wife feel comfortable?" I coughed and sputtered from the water, then asked him, "If you hate me so much, why not divorce me?" He didn't answer, only stared at me for a long while, then burst into mocking laughter. "How interesting this is. How could I bear to let you go? Unless you die. That's right. Only when I'm dead will no one know Dorian's secret. After the Lee family was stripped of their titles, Dorian knelt all night before the ancestral hall, only to beg permission to bring Autumn into the manor and protect her for life. It was only then that I understood. The one he truly cared for had always been her. That very night, after I drank the preserving medicine, blood began flowing continuously from below. I lay unconscious for 3 days and nights, yet Dorian never came to visit even once. Only because at that time, Autumn was being humiliated by people his mother-in-law had sent, humiliated to the point she wanted to die from shame. Several old women stood right outside the courtyard Dorian had prepared for her, exposing Autumn's identity as a criminal minister's daughter. She should have been consigned to servitude as a palace maid, yet shamelessly she climbed into another's bed to become a concubine, and now dared to dream of properly entering through the front gates. Those women cursed without ever mentioning Dorian's name, making anyone who heard think Autumn was a shameless woman who had lost all face, as if she had seduced every noble gentleman in the capital. Several noble ladies flew into rage and ordered servants to hold her down and slap her face repeatedly. Only after Dorian finished comforting Autumn did he remember me and come to visit. At that time, I lay weakly against the bed, reproaching him that father and I had spent so much effort, bought off countless connections to help Autumn escape the fate of being sent to serve as a palace maid. Never imagining she would commit such shameful acts. Had I known it would come to this, I never would have saved her in the first place. Now she's even caused the ladies of the manor to suffer such humiliation. Dorian paused slightly. You and she were originally as close as sisters. Why do you speak such words? I'm afraid my husband has misunderstood. I've never been a kind-hearted person. If Autumn truly fell into my hands, I would certainly skin and fillet her with my own hands. I lowered my gaze to watch the veins bulging on the back of his hand, my lips curving into a smile though my eyes remained cold. But fortunately, my husband comes from a noble family of pure breeding and would naturally never commit such base acts. I must admit my mother-in-law's move was truly vicious. What kind of prestigious clan is the Shen family? Autumn's reputation has been completely destroyed. In this lifetime, she can forget about ever stepping foot through the Shen Manor's gates. However, Autumn wasn't satisfied either. She actually dared to jump into the lake in the freezing depths of winter. I sat in the tea house, hand-holding a warm cup of tea heated on a small stove, silently watching Dorian, Shen plunge into the icy lake to save her. He had secretly slipped out of the manor to meet Autumn, not even bringing a single attendant with him. Ruby poured tea with trembling hands. Young miss, that lake is bitterly cold. Could someone die? I set down my teacup, my gaze cold as ice watching the two struggling in the freezing water, my voice low as frost. My unborn child was lost because of them. They absolutely must pay with their lives. Ruby whispered softly. The pregnancy medicine young miss drank that day, this servant already had it tested. There was nothing wrong with it. So even if he doesn't believe what young miss says, it's a clever tactic indeed. I laughed coldly. Autumn Lee deserves death. That scheming cat who loves to seduce other women's husbands deserves death as well. Ruby, tell me, after today, can I become the wealthiest widow in the capital? But heaven didn't favor my wishes. Dorian was an excellent swimmer. In the end, he still managed to push Autumn to shore. The people on the bank pulled him up as well. I looked up at the sky until tears streamed from the corners of my eyes, then gathered my skirts and ran toward Dorian, sobbing as I cried, "Husband, you absolutely must not die. Don't leave me alone." While struggling in the water, Dorian had clearly seen me sitting in the tea house, leisurely watching him drown. He opened his eyes weakly, his ice-cold hand pressed against my cheek and smiled faintly. You'd best pray I die right here. If I survive, you won't. But fate doesn't follow one's wishes. Dorian survived, and I hadn't died either. After that rescue in the lake, Dorian suffered fundamental damage to his body, losing the ability to father children from then on. I threatened him. If he dared harm me or anyone around me, I would expose how he destroyed his own body saving Autumn, letting the entire capital know of this humiliation. The Shen family's reputation was more important than his very life. He had no choice but to back down. From that day forward, Dorian began playing the role of a devoted husband, putting on a show with me of marital harmony and affection, becoming the ideal couple admired throughout the capital. But no one knew that everything he did was only to humiliate me bit by bit. After my mother-in-law learned I couldn't bear children, and saw that Dorian wasn't permitted to take concubines, she bitterly resented that I had severed the Shen family's bloodline. Every night she forced me to kneel before the ancestral hall in penance. Fearing it would damage the mother-son relationship with Dorian, she placed all blame for causing Autumn's death upon my head. After jumping in the lake, Autumn didn't receive timely treatment. She contracted severe cold sickness, and within less than 2 months she perished flagrantly. Dorian hated me even more. His hands gripped my throat tightly as he growled, "You venomous woman! You're the one who killed her!" With difficulty, I curled my lips into a bitter smile. I merely refused to let anyone save her. How does that count as killing? After all the things she did, the fact I didn't stab her twice myself should be considered merciful. Why not just strangle me to death today and avenge her? Dorian's fingertips tightened then loosened repeatedly. It wasn't that he couldn't bear to kill me. He simply didn't dare gamble with the Shen family's reputation. Just like that, he and I tormented each other, living through a chaotic 20 years that dragged on endlessly. Reborn for a second life, I didn't want to relive those days again. I avoided every opportunity to encounter Dorian. Because of this, Father confined me to the courtyard, forbidding me from seeing anyone. On the contrary, Ruby grew anxious. "Young miss, you've already reached marriageable age. The master has kept you locked up so long. I fear it will cause outsiders to gossip and affect young Miss's reputation." My hand froze mid-air, my brush pausing on the page. Unfortunately, Father wasn't as ruthless as I'd hoped. He didn't dare truly destroy my reputation. Father was just like Dorian in my previous life, wanting to kill me yet unable to actually do it. Ruby sighed. "Who knows how much longer young Miss will be confined?" I rubbed my wrist gently and answered calmly, "Soon. Grandmother doesn't know the reason I've been confined, but to demonstrate the authority of the household matriarch, she's punished me to copy Buddhist sutras every day. In the past, when mother couldn't produce a legitimate son, grandmother used this same method to torment her. The Buddhist scriptures must be copied from dusk until dawn, copied until eyes blur and head spins before it's considered complete. Grandmother said, only this way can one's temperament be refined. And only when bringing the Buddhist scriptures to present them may I leave the courtyard." In grandmother's room, my aunt was kneeling half-bent beside the bed, massaging her feet. Aunt had a gentle temperament, but her husband held a high official position, so grandmother often summoned her back to the manor to scold and discipline. Grandmother wouldn't let me stand, so I could only kneel to one side. Grandmother's health was poor and she rarely went out. Aunt massaged her feet while discussing the situation in the capital. "I heard that Minister Li has elevated his concubine to the position of second wife." Grandmother closed her eyes and said calmly, "With so much turmoil in the inner courts, someone must be there to manage things. I was the same. After my husband's principal wife passed away, I was married in as second wife after only 2 months." Aunt accepted the bowl of medicine from the servant's hands, passed it to grandmother, then continued, "I heard the late Lady Liu was beautiful in appearance and gave birth to a pair of dragon and phoenix twins. Both children are exceptionally handsome and outstanding. The young master of the Li household and his older sister resemble each other as if cast from the same mold." As the words finished, the medicine bowl in grandmother's hand immediately fell to the ground, shattering into pieces. She rubbed the pressure point her temple, waved her hand and said, "All of you withdraw. I wish to be alone in quiet contemplation." Aunt and I exchanged glances, then both withdrew together. Not until we reached a place with no one around did Aunt finally speak in a low voice, slowly saying, "That year, to pave the way, elder brother, mother married me, a daughter who had just reached marriageable age, to an old man nearly 50 as his second wife. Throughout those years I endured every humiliation, living worse than death. She never showed half a word of concern. I too was born from her. Simply because I'm female, she's never regarded me as human. All these years, for the sake of elder brother, she thought nothing of bringing countless concubines into the Song household, yet not one bore a son." A flash of bitter resentment passed through Aunt's eyes. Finally she couldn't restrain a cold laugh. "Never imagined that the grandson she's waited for all these years actually carries another's surname. Truly karmic retribution." I lowered my gaze, my voice soft as a passing breeze. Aunt, that shop in the Western District, you should stop going there. Well then, today I've at least swallowed one bitter mouthful of resentment. Aunt gave a bitter, sour laugh. Years ago when I married out, Song Manor only prepared a few shabby dowry items for me. If mother hadn't secretly gifted me an additional portion of dowry, I fear my life would have been even more wretched than pigs and dogs. In this life, Aunt had been adding poison to grandmother's medicinal broths, causing her body to gradually deteriorate. But in my previous life, this matter was quickly exposed. Aunt was no match for a cunning old fox like grandmother who had schemed for half a lifetime. Grandmother later destroyed Aunt's face and sent several courtesans into Aunt's husband's household. In the end, Aunt was tormented to death in the inner courts. Before leaving, Aunt suddenly turned to ask me, "Why do you trust me so much?" I turned my head to look at her and answered coldly, "Shared interests may not ensure people walk the same path, but shared hatred can. Aunt hates grandmother for destroying your entire life. As for me, I also hate grandmother for greedily coveting mother's dowry. She conspired to destroy her childhood engagement, forcing her to marry into the Song family, thus ruining an entire lifetime." The corner of Aunt's mouth lifted slightly, revealing an appreciative smile. "You're even cleverer than I thought. None of them are your match." Before mother passed away, the country doctor grandmother summoned diagnosed that she was carrying a daughter. Grandmother felt this was a complete waste of money and silver, so she secretly altered several precious medicinal ingredients in mother's prescription. When mother died in difficult labor, grandmother witnessed with her own eyes the infant's corpse covered in bruises. Only then did she turn to the old woman beside her and sigh, "If I hadn't switched those medicinal ingredients, could my grandson's life have been saved?" All these years, grandmother continuously arranged for father to take in additional concubines, yet they only produced several illegitimate daughters. She never imagined in her wildest dreams that the grandson she had waited for day and night would ultimately not carry the Song surname. At a banquet, she finally met that child, the grandson she had longed for half her life. Intelligent and clever, only 3 years old yet already able to read and recite poetry. Grandmother had always been miserly. Yet at that time she actually gifted him a longevity lock crafted from pure gold. She once had thoughts of bringing that child back to Song Manor to raise, but as the matriarch of a great clan, how could she be so foolish to that extent? She could only grit her teeth and bury the secret deep in her heart until she fell ill from depression. From the time she returned from the Liminar, not even 3 days had passed before she could neither eat nor drink, her spirit completely withdrawn. This time no one discovered she'd been poisoned. Everyone only thought that due to irregular eating habits, her body had gradually weakened. After grandmother fell ill, every invitation sent to the manor bore my name. Though father was wary of me, he also couldn't confine me to the courtyard forever. On the road to the Prime Minister's manor, I told the carriage driver to stop so I could purchase a pair of earrings made of white jade. Father glanced at me and laughed coldly. "Princess Xianxia has seen countless precious treasures. Do you think that pair of common earrings could possibly catch her eye?" I lifted the box and smiled casually. "At least it's better than arriving empty-handed." Father snorted, his voice mocking. "Suit yourself. Just don't embarrass Song Manor when the time comes." Throwing out that remark, he flicked his sleeves and walked away. Between father and me, we had long since turned against each other. He originally wasn't skilled at maintaining a harmonious facade like I was, to the point that now even sitting in the same carriage together was unbearable to him. I waited a very long time before the Prime Minister's manor. Only after seeing Consort Xiao step down from her carriage did I leisurely enter. Rather than heading toward the front courtyard, I pretended to twist my ankle, sitting to rest on a boulder beside a small path, gently rotating my ankle while secretly observing. When I saw Princess Xianxia appear, I immediately stood up and performed a hasty greeting. Princess Xianxia lightly raised her hand in acknowledgement, then turned to instruct the attending maid to help her into the side room to rest. I glanced up at the Dongzhou pearl earrings swaying at Princess Xianxia's earlobes, hesitated briefly then spoke up. "Your Highness naturally possesses heaven-born noble bearing. To wear such precious objects on top of that, I fear it may be somewhat excessive." The maid behind her immediately changed expression and snapped. "How insolent! How dare you comment so casually on Princess Xianxia? I lowered my gaze but still gathered courage to speak. This humble woman once heard from her maternal grandfather, who used to trade in pearls and jade. When young, this humble woman heard him say that Dongzhou pearls, when placed under sunlight, will reveal rainbow colors. Princess Yongning then removed the right earring to examine it. Sure enough, she discovered something amiss, and turned to instruct the maid to return to her room and fetch another pair of earrings. Not far away, several young ladies from noble households were advancing this way. If she returned now to fetch earrings, I feared there wouldn't be time. I hastily presented the pair of white jade earrings I'd purchased on the way to the manor. This is a pair of earrings this humble woman happened to select while strolling the streets. Though merely of ordinary design in recent months, the accounting office has only allocated me a single coin for cosmetics. My purse has truly become pitifully empty. That pair of white jade earrings actually wasn't anything precious. The jade color lacked clarity and carried quite a few flaws. Yet after Princess Yongning saw them, she merely smiled faintly. This palace finds them quite suitable. When Princess Yongning appeared at the banquet, Consort Xiao happened to be discussing with the young ladies how to distinguish real Dongzhou pearls from fake ones. The simplest method was to hold the Dongzhou pearl under sunlight. The genuine article would reflect a 5-colored rainbow, while if the jade appeared grayish and cloudy, it was fake. This year the number of large Dongzhou pearls presented as tribute was extremely scarce, only enough to craft a single pair of earrings. Currently, that pair of earrings was being worn by Consort Xiao, the most favored person in the imperial harem. Consort Xiao glanced toward Princess Yongning with a smug expression, but saw her wearing only a pair of white jade earrings. She couldn't help but mock her openly. Princess Yongning wears such inferior items. Aren't you afraid of bringing shame to the imperial family? Princess Yongning lowered her gaze and smiled faintly. Recently the southern territories have suffered continuous floods. This palace has been single-mindedly concerned for the people, sharing Father Emperor's worries. Naturally, I haven't had much attention for such frivolous matters. On the contrary, it's the imperial consort wearing Dongzhou pearls worth 1,000 gold to attend a banquet at the Prime Minister's manor. This truly moves this palace deeply. Everyone knew that recently Princess Yongning and the Prime Minister had donated considerable to establish relief stations in the disaster areas. As those words fell, the face of Consort Xiao, so lavishly adorned with cosmetics, immediately turned deathly pale without a trace of color. A young maid came to fetch me from the side room. On the way back, she couldn't help but laugh, her eyes curving into crescent moons. At that moment, the consort's complexion truly went green. This servant nearly couldn't hold back from laughing. Consort Xiao had secretly switched out the birthday gifts His Majesty had bestowed upon Princess Yongning just days before. In my previous life, that pair of fake Dongzhou pearl earrings caused Princess Yongning to lose complete face before the entire capital. But in this life, I had reversed the situation, thereby earning a measure of her goodwill. After my ankle was treated with medicine, a maid escorted me to the banquet. Father was already advanced in years and his eyes were dim. He kept glancing toward Princess Yongning sitting in the seat of honor. He probably thought his vision was failing, constantly doubting whether Princess Yongning was truly wearing the pair of earrings I'd gifted. It wasn't until he saw me sitting beside Princess Yongning, occasionally conversing and laughing with her, that he stood there completely stunned. As we left the Prime Minister's manor, Father snorted coldly. You're quite capable indeed. Even Princess Yongning has been won over by you. Before the words finished, the steward from Princess Yongning's household approached carrying a brocade box, smiling as she said, Minister Song speaks truly. Today Princess Yongning indeed praised your young miss as clever and perceptive. She opened the box. Inside was a pair of gold keys together with an exquisitely crafted cosmetics case of flowing gold. Father stared fixedly at the items in the box, his face flushing crimson. He nearly fainted from anger on the spot. Just one pair of inferior white jade earrings, and Princess Yongning had seen through my struggles. Princess Yongning's meaning couldn't have been clearer. The gold keys and the flowing gold cosmetics case were originally gifts meant for the household matriarch, but now grandmother was gravely ill. In Song Manor's inner courts, the only person left with proper status and qualification to manage affairs was me, the legitimate daughter of the principal wife. Though father made a show of letting me take charge of household matters, in reality he only assigned me miscellaneous tasks like purchasing, bookkeeping, managing oil, salt, firewood, and rice. My life couldn't be called luxurious, but it also wasn't to the point of destitution. Spring departed, autumn arrived, and the days passed swiftly. During this period, father had secretly found me a poor scholar who hadn't yet passed the examinations, planning to marry me off perfunctorily and be done with it. I merely mentioned offhandedly that before the marriage, Princess Yongning would personally inspect the match on my behalf. With that, he no longer dared mention the matter again. Compared to my previous life, the collapse of the Li household this time came slightly later. In my previous life, Minister Lai had his property confiscated for embezzling disaster relief funds. But in this life, he was dismissed from office for accidentally causing the death of a courtesan in a pleasure house. I clearly remembered that in my previous life, the one who caused that courtesan's death was a different confidant beside Prince Heng. It had long been rumored that Prince Heng was debauched and licentious. This time, Minister Li must certainly be taking the fall for him. I never understood why such major variables appeared in this life. It wasn't until one day when I went to a fabric shop to select silk for winter garments that I happened to overhear several ladies at a nearby table gossiping, and suddenly became enlightened. Who knows what kind of love potion the young master of the Grand Tutor's household accidentally drank. It's been 3 days without food or water, and he's been kneeling constantly in the ancestral hall. His mother is Princess Yongning herself. Who is she? How could she possibly allow her own son to destroy his future prospects just to marry a criminal minister's daughter into the manor? But after all, he is flesh and blood, she bore herself. I heard the princess finally agreed to let that wretched girl enter the gates as a concubine. Hearing that familiar name, my hand froze mid-air. Because she was a criminal minister's daughter, he was willing to destroy his own future prospects to marry her into the household. It seems Dorian has also been reborn. In my previous life, Autumn's death was what he regretted most. Therefore, in this life, even if it costs him everything, he wants to marry her into the manor no matter what. I wonder if this time, with Autumn falling into Princess Yongning's hands, whether Dorian can still protect her. I sat in the tea house, took a sip of tea, and while eating dim sum couldn't help but laugh at the thought of that scene. Unexpectedly, Autumn appeared right before me wearing a veil over her face. Her eyes, like autumn waters, glared at me furiously. Song Camilla. Why even now do you refuse to let me go? Do you truly want to force me to my death? I don't understand. What exactly am I fighting you for? She bit her lip, her voice trembling. You destroyed my reputation. Wasn't it just to snatch young Master Shen from my hands? Heaven and earth bear witness, I can fight for anything, but Dorian alone. I'm perfectly willing to hand over with both hands to anyone else. Destroyed your reputation. I suddenly understood the implication in her words and smiled as I asked in return. Are you talking about that incident years ago at the Women's Academy? When you copied my painting and then took poems from several other young ladies, piecing them together and claiming them as your own, ultimately seizing the title of the capital's foremost talented lady. In my previous life, for the sake of old affection, and considering how important reputation is for an unmarried young lady, I swallowed my anger and didn't expose you. But in this life I have no reason to spare your face. Several days ago, at the poetry gathering hosted by the censor's wife, I brought out the painting I'd created at the Women's Academy and displayed it publicly during the banquet. On that faded painting were inscribed quite a few poems. Before long, someone discovered that every brushstroke in the painting, even the wording in the poems, bore striking resemblance to the work Autumn had once presented at a different poetry gathering. At that time, she merely replied casually that it was a youthful work with one statement. She cut off all questions. She probably never imagined I still kept the original painting from years ago. That title of the capital's foremost talented lady that she once held her head high and boasted about was actually nothing but a laughingstock in everyone's eyes. Through the thin layer of gauze, I could still clearly see Autumn's face flush crimson, then turn deathly pale. I looked at her, my voice gentle as a passing breeze. I told you before. If you dared appear before me again, I would certainly expose that secret to the light. Her eyes turned red blood, glaring at me viciously. Then I'll expose the fact that you killed your own people. Anyway, the Li household has already collapsed. If I can't survive, I'll drag you down to death with me. It seems there's been some progress. She's learned how to threaten others. I burst out laughing and slowly raised my voice. Miss Li, why do you copy others' poetry? You're supposed to be a talented lady. How could you do such improper things? That statement rang out, causing quite a few people in the tea house to turn and look. Autumn's face went deathly pale. In an almost desperate scramble, she hurriedly fled downstairs, then crashed directly into a donkey cart. Seeing that scene, I finally couldn't restrain myself and laughed aloud. Sitting in the carriage returning to the manor, I still hadn't stopped laughing. Ruby finally couldn't hold back and spoke up. Young miss, didn't you say you would become a woman with a gentle heart and proper conduct? How can a woman with a gentle heart and proper conduct laugh so happily? Impossible. Unless she absolutely cannot hold it in. However, as soon as I returned to the manor, I immediately couldn't laugh anymore, because people from the Shen family had arrived. In this life, I ultimately still couldn't escape. They were urgently seeking a young woman of appropriate age and suitability to marry Dorian. In the end, their inquiries led them to me. Only this time, Father used the excuse that I needed to attend to grandmother's illness and temporarily manage the central storehouse of the manor, so he deflected and declined. His expression was grim as he coldly warned me. Your temperament is so willful and unruly. If you marry into the Grand Tutor's manor, I fear you'll only cause all sorts of trouble and implicate the entire Song family as well. Anyone could see through his intentions. He simply wanted to push Autumn into becoming Dorian's wife, nothing more. I had no interest in interfering with that matter. I simply turned around and silently returned to my courtyard. But it seems I underestimated Father's methods. As dusk fell, a kitchen maid brought over sedative medicine. Her gaze held a certain evasiveness. Only after watching me finish drinking and set down the medicine bowl did she finally withdraw her probing look. Before long, a man reeking of sweat burst into the room, yanking back the bedcovers only to find several pillows arranged in the shape of a person. The moment he turned his head, he was struck squarely on the forehead with a flower vase, collapsing unconscious, blood pooling everywhere. Ruby heard the commotion and immediately grabbed a bamboo stick, rushing into the room. The instant she opened the door and saw a man covered in blood lying sprawled on the ground, she immediately shrieked in terror. Not long after, a crowd of people carrying torches swarmed into my courtyard. When Father appeared, I acted as though utterly terrified, rushing toward him while crying and trembling as I said, "Father. Fortunately your daughter managed to knock that scoundrel unconscious in time. Otherwise, your daughter's reputation would surely have been impossible to preserve." Father's expression immediately became extremely ugly. "As long as you're unharmed, that's good." I bowed in courtesy, my expression gentle and grateful. "Many thanks for Father's concern. Your daughter is fine. I only need to drink another bowl of sedative broth and I'll be able to sleep." As the words finished, Father's expression immediately stiffened. I lowered my voice, just loud enough for both of us to hear. "Father assigned your daughter to manage the kitchen's purchasing accounts. The kitchen staff who want to skim a little profit must all rely on me, mustn't they? Please think carefully. How stupid would someone have to be to dare tamper with my food?" Just then, outside the courtyard rang the announcement of a young servant. "Master." The old madam, after finishing her sedative broth tonight and going to rest, suddenly began frothing at the mouth in her sleep. The people in the courtyard have already rushed to summon the physician. Father's expression immediately transformed dramatically. In panic, he rushed toward grandmother's courtyard. That night, lanterns blazed brilliantly. Finally, they managed to pull grandmother's life back from the gates of death. After things stabilized somewhat, Father slowly returned to the front courtyard. The moment he stepped through the gate, he saw two blood-soaked corpses laid out in the courtyard. He stood frozen for an instant, then retreated in terror until his back hit the wall, clutching it as he retched violently. The servants quickly used white cloth to cover the bodies. I bowed in courtesy to Father and said slowly, "Last night, your daughter discovered a vial of poison in embroiderer's room. It turns out that maid actually dared to develop a heart serving two masters. After last night's interrogation, she even dared claim it was Father who ordered her to do it. Truly absurd and chaotic words. Father has always been filially pious. How could he possibly harm grandmother?" Therefore your daughter executed her along with that scoundrel. To outsiders, we'll simply say we caught 2 adulterers whose crime deserved death. Does father find your daughter's handling of this matter acceptable? Father's complexion alternated between green and white. After a long while, he finally choked out a sentence. Good, very good. You're quite capable indeed. Just then, a servant entered to report that Princess Yongning had arrived, her carriage waiting before the manor gates. I smiled, gazing intently at father's deathly pale face, and said slowly, naturally I possess some capability. Otherwise, how could Princess Yongning, immediately upon her southern journey with the Prime Minister to return to the capital, so urgently wish to see your daughter? She even said she would personally select a marriage match for me. Father, think carefully. Forget the Grand Tutor's manner. Even if I now wished to marry into the imperial family, it wouldn't be a difficult matter at all. Those words just now were merely something I used to frighten father. Princess Yongning's eagerness to see me is actually only because previously, during idle moments, I once told her several stories I created myself. Within those stories, I cleverly wove the experiences of my past and present lives into dramatic narratives that left her utterly captivated. Having just returned to the capital with the Prime Minister not long ago, she already sent someone to fetch me. Perhaps it's truly a karmic bond spanning 2 lifetimes. If in this life I don't marry Dorian, father will certainly deliberately select a terrible marriage for me, destroying my entire life. As a woman, bound by propriety and ritual teachings, one's fate cannot be determined by oneself. Rather than letting others make the choices, I might as well take my own future into my own hands. Never imagined such coincidence. Princess Yongning actually brought up the matter of my marriage. I heard Princess Yongning has taken notice of you, and intends to bring you into the manor as a daughter-in-law. I immediately smiled faintly, answering without the slightest hesitation. This humble woman would never willingly jump into that pit of fire. Princess Yongning laughed softly. The Shen family is an aristocratic clan of noble lineage. Dorian can also be considered refined and elegant. If you're worried about the young miss of the Lai household, don't concern yourself. Yongning has her methods. She certainly won't be able to enter the manor gates. Does your highness still remember that story segment I once told you? About the maternal cousin who had an affair with another's husband, then remarried and bore a daughter. If your highness has ever met Miss Li, you'd surely notice that between this humble woman and her, our facial features bear some resemblance. In that instant, Princess Yongning was so shocked she couldn't speak. That matter is actually true. Naturally it's true. Such an absurd affair. How would this humble woman dare fabricate it for entertainment? Then your father has always been trying to harm you. I lowered my gaze and answered softly. For the sake of paving the way for his illegitimate daughter, father would dare do anything. Last night he even had someone add sedative drugs to my broth, then sent a wild man into my room, intending to destroy this humble woman's chastity. If that maid hadn't panicked and served the wrong bowl, I fear today this humble woman would no longer have the face to see your highness. Princess Yongning stood frozen, clenching her sleeves tightly. Everything you've said is true. You had to endure such humiliation. I merely smiled faintly, my eyes still lowered. Matters like these, even if spoken, no one would believe them. Your highness may simply regard it as listening to a dramatic tale. At that moment, the old nurse standing behind the princess suddenly spoke softly. What Miss Song says must be the truth. The old nurse standing behind Princess Yongning continued. Today when this servant came to fetch you, I heard the gatekeepers of Song Manor gossiping. Last night at Song Manor, a major incident occurred. The old madam fell ill, and within the manor they beat to death a maid and a scoundrel who were having an affair. My entire body trembled slightly in waves. Princess Yongning's gaze toward me immediately filled with sympathy. Is there anything you wish for this palace to help you with? I shook my head, my voice soft as a passing breeze. This humble woman only hopes to marry out soon. Even if it means marrying into an ordinary common household, that would be acceptable. Princess Yongning immediately interrupted. How could a common household possibly protect you? As long as you're willing, several of this palace's imperial brothers, you may marry whichever one you wish. I quickly lowered my eyes, concealing the flash of joy that had just appeared in the depths of my heart, and hesitantly spoke with trepidation. Then what about the third prince? Princess Yongning paused for a moment. You're referring to third brother. Everyone in the capital knew that third Prince Marcus Chen was the son of a dancing girl. Though he carried the status of a prince, he had no backing or power supporting him. But fortunately, he campaigned on battlefields year-round and could be considered capable of earning merit and reputation through his own efforts. What I had my eye on naturally wasn't that bit of reputation, but rather that I knew clearly he would soon die in battle at the front lines. I cannot sever worldly ties and take refuge in Buddhism. If I wish to cast off the Song surname sooner or later, I must marry out. Since it must be done, I might as well do it earlier and maintain my chastity as a widow. If Marcus marries me and then dies, I can still help him maintain the inner household and handle affairs, which can be considered no great loss. With face unchanged and heart untroubled, I spoke calmly. After our previous encounter, this humble woman has harbored devoted feelings for the third prince. Princess Yongning paused in contemplation, then asked again. You mean that time during the spring hunt when you happened to pass by the military camp and witnessed him beheading a deserter? Thinking carefully, in this life it seems I truly only met Marcus on that one occasion. I could only nod gently. Princess Yongning looked at me, her expression revealing some confusion. That time, quite a few noble young ladies were frightened out of their wits. This palace had thought third brother would probably never marry anyone in this lifetime. That was indeed the case in my previous life. Thanks to Princess Yongning taking charge, the marriage between Marcus and me was essentially settled. When father heard this, he laughed with contempt, his voice full of mockery. You're truly seeking your own death. What sort of person is Marcus? His Majesty threw him to the frontier simply wanting him to perish on his own. Do you truly think you've found someone to rely on? From childhood he's had a murderous nature. Even the wet nurse who raised him, he dared to strike down. Just wait and see how long that scheming heart of yours lasts before you die at his hands. I smiled faintly and answered calmly. Whether your daughter dies at the hands of her future husband remains unclear. But your daughter knows one thing for certain: I will die after you, father. I reached for a thick ledger from the table and gently placed it before him. This is a copy of the dowry Mother bought when she married into Song Manor. Please prepare my dowry according to this. Father opened the book and flipped through several pages, his fingers still trembling. Song Manor, where are we supposed to find the funds to prepare all this? Are you trying to force me to my death? I smiled faintly, my voice gentle yet my words piercing straight to the heart. If we add up the dowry father has secretly been preparing for autumn, together with all the real estate and land properties you've separated out for her over the years, I'm afraid we could still gather about 80%. Father, my future husband has a violent temperament. If you let him discover you've stripped away assets to reduce the dowry for an illegitimate daughter, who knows, someone might truly lose their life. In the end, father still couldn't bear to completely sever ties with the illegitimate daughter born by the woman in his heart. He could only grit his teeth and force out a sentence. 50%. 50% dowry will nearly drain Song Manor's entire family fortune. I smiled and nodded, very satisfied. Reborn for a lifetime, many things were no longer like my previous life. But in one respect, autumn remained exactly the same as before. Several old women stood before her courtyard cursing loudly and incessantly, not knowing how to restrain herself as a criminal minister's daughter, yet still harboring delusions of climbing into bed to become an outside wife. However, this time outside Autumn's courtyard there were quite a few more people standing guard. That matter was very quickly suppressed. In the blink of an eye, the day of the banquet at the minister's manor arrived. Counting the days, Marcus would soon return to the capital. After he returned to marry me and then set out again for the battlefield, I could maintain my chastity as a widow. With Dorian standing up to protect her, Autumn wouldn't suffer the terrible humiliation she did in my previous life. I just never expected she would actually dare appear at a banquet like this. In a deserted pathway through the garden, she appeared before me, her eyes brimming with tears, her voice soft and choked with sobs. Sister Song, Camilla Song, you schemed against my mother. Now you won't even leave me a path to survival. A path to survival. I tilted my head and asked calmly in return. You destroyed my reputation to the point that even the dowry father was preparing. You didn't leave a single portion. Are you trying to force me to death? If I truly wanted to force her to death, I wouldn't need to waste effort using such half-hearted methods. My gaze flickered toward behind the tree trunk, where a familiar figure stood silently. I understood now. So she staged this entire performance for that person to witness. Without saying another word, I raised my hand and slapped her hard across the face. Autumn clutched her cheek, staring at me with eyes full of disbelief. I smiled faintly and tilted my head to look at her. Don't you love pretending to be pitiful before men? I'm merely helping you put on a convincing show. Autumn was frightened into silence, unable to resist, her eyes blazing with fury as she glared at me viciously. Song Camilla. You killed my mother, poisoned your grandmother, caused your own father to fall ill. You've committed every evil deed. There will be retribution. Something's wrong. Dorian has already left. Who is she saying all this for? At that very moment, behind me rang out the sound of steady footsteps. A man wearing purple robes, handsome and refined in appearance, yet his entire body couldn't conceal a cold murderous aura. He met my gaze directly, raised his eyebrows and smiled casually. Miss Song, weren't you supposed to be infatuated with me? Why do you look as though you don't recognize me? So it's Marcus. I startled, immediately bowing in courtesy. Autumn, with half her face swollen red, cried out in pain. Everything I just said, if even half a word is false, may I die without peace. Third Prince, do you truly wish to marry such a vicious woman? So that's it. Seeing me deprived of my dowry, she wanted to destroy this marriage engagement as well. My heart clenched slightly. If this match is broken, where would I find another husband who'll die conveniently so I can easily maintain my chastity as a widow? Hearing this, Marcus turned to look at me for a long while, his eyes deep and unfathomable. Originally I thought this unbetrothed fiancée would merely be some tedious young miss from a noble household. Never imagined she could be this interesting. I stood there stunned for a moment, then immediately removed the incense sachet from my waist and slowly hung it on his belt. Autumn stared in shock at the scene before her eyes, as if unable to believe what was happening. I glanced at her and said calmly, "You're fortunate that today you didn't succeed in ruining my good fortune. Otherwise, you'd already be dead." Marcus laughed and tilted his head to ask me, "Is Miss Song truly so kind-hearted, willing to spare her life? In truth, it's not that I'm being magnanimous at all. Acting myself, how could it compare to watching her and Princess Yongning tear each other apart like rabid dogs?" That day, Autumn was thoroughly frightened. She just kept shrinking back, clinging tightly to Dorian's person. Meanwhile, the noble young lady who had just become engaged to the Shen family was so distressed she burst into tears right at the banquet. After the feast ended, the minister immediately sent a young servant to relay a message to Dorian. If he still insists on taking Autumn as a concubine, the engagement will be cancelled. Hearing this, Dorian showed no clear reaction. He merely kept his eyes fixed on the incense sachet hanging at Marcus's waist. I never expected that on the road returning to the manor, right in the middle of a deserted alley, Dorian would block my path. He didn't bother with pleasantries, opening his mouth with a cold, mocking tone. "Song Camilla, you truly know how to calculate. In this life, you've chosen Marcus instead. Just how poor is your judgment to end up like this? And you remain unchanged, forever infatuated with Autumn Lai." Dorian didn't get angry, merely smiled faintly, that smile carrying several traces of derision. "I heard these past days, your life in Song Manor hasn't been easy. Why not let me help and send betrothal gifts to marry you?" In that instant, I truly thought I'd misheard. Exactly like my previous life, after I died, my soul wandered through empty space, silently watching him approach my coffin. I once thought he'd be so overjoyed he couldn't sleep. But no. He sat through the entire night before my coffin, his eyes red and swollen, his mouth muttering ceaselessly. "In the next life, be a good person. Don't be so vicious anymore." He originally didn't believe in ghosts or spirits, yet for my sake he invited Taoist priests to chant sutras for 3 days and nights. Those who came to pay respects at that time all thought he and I had lived together in loving affection our entire lives. I smiled coldly and asked him, "In this life I'm even more vicious than my previous one. You still want to marry me? Aren't you afraid of being tormented to death?" Dorian's gaze darkened momentarily, but he said nothing. I turned away with a faint smile. Must be the wine at the minister's manor was too strong, causing you to become muddled and delusional. You're still someone who loves theatrical performances just like before. It's only a pity I'm already engaged. I don't have time to play out tragic comedies with you anymore. Dorian gazed at me silently, his voice hoarse as he managed a single sentence. Camilla, between you and me, is there truly no possibility left? Not necessarily. I smiled, watching the light in his eyes gradually dim. Don't you already know? I only wish to be a widow, nothing more. If you're willing to die, I could truly consider marrying you. The moment I turned to leave, behind me rang out cold laughter tinged with mocking pain. So in this life, you still wish for my death that much? Then should I hope you live forever to continue tormenting me instead? Before the gates of Song Manor, Ruby stood beside the carriage, desperately winking at me. I watched for ages without understanding what she meant, so I frowned and reproached her gently. If you have something to say, can't you just speak clearly? Ruby bit her lip, pointed behind my back, and said in a small voice, "Third Prince, His Highness is standing right behind young miss." I turned my head and immediately saw Marcus standing there silently, his gaze calm and focused on me, not saying a word. I heard from my subordinates that someone surnamed Shen has been following your carriage the entire way, so I conveniently came to take a look. I stood frozen, looking up at him, my voice trembling as I asked, "Then did your highness overhear anything?" I didn't hear anything. Just as I was about to breathe a sigh of relief, I heard him laugh coldly. Only heard you saying something about wanting to become a widow, wanting to marry someone who'll die early. I spend the year campaigning on battlefields, life and death unpredictable. Turns out Miss Song set her sights on me for that reason. My heart felt as though covered in ashes. On the road back to the manor, my entire body swayed unsteadily, unable to stand firm. I had to lean on Ruby's shoulder, choking back sobs. "Ruby, perhaps I should find some secluded nunnery to take refuge in for a few years. After things settle down, then I'll return." Ruby gently patted my head, her voice soft and soothing. "This servant will follow young miss wherever she goes." Father had originally been bedridden with illness, yet as soon as he heard I'd angered Marcus, he actually forced himself up and managed to drink several bowls of broth. And yet, by the very next day, when the betrothal gifts were delivered to the manor, his complexion turned black as ink, as though thunder and lightning were about to strike across the heavens. Even I never expected Marcus would actually truly want to marry me. 2 days after the grand wedding ceremony, he immediately set out to campaign at the frontier. He departed without waking me. By the time sunlight reached the eaves, I finally hazily stirred awake. Looking at the empty bedside, I remembered last night when I grasped his arm, breathing heavily, wanting to say something, yet in the end couldn't bring myself to speak. His journey to the frontier was by imperial decree. Marcus was originally a neglected prince. If he dared defy the order, the emperor would certainly find an excuse to eliminate him. Even if I revealed the future outcome, it couldn't change anything. In the end, I only said softly, "Don't die. I'm not ready to maintain my chastity as a widow so soon." Before leaving, Marcus placed the storehouse keys on my dressing table. All the reward silver he'd accumulated over the years lay within that storehouse. My ice-frozen heart momentarily felt a slight stirring. But the moment I stood up, my legs went so weak I nearly collapsed face first to the ground. I ground my teeth and cursed that brute once in my heart. Well then, better to become a widow soon for peace of mind. I lived peacefully for 2 months. Autumn finally emerged from seclusion. But unexpectedly, in the midst of a crowded marketplace, she was intercepted by a fierce-looking woman. That woman cursed loudly, saying Autumn had an affair with her husband. Then without the slightest hesitation, pressed her to the ground and slapped her repeatedly with resounding blows. Before being dragged away by others, Autumn pulled the bronze hairpin from her head and viciously slashed a line across the other woman's face. Never imagining that bronze hairpin had been poisoned, the wound on her face, no matter how much medicine was applied, could never heal. Despite this, Dorian still resolutely insisted on taking her as a concubine, causing Princess Yongning to fall ill from rage. Perhaps because her face had been destroyed, or perhaps because she refused to accept being a concubine, Autumn jumped into the lake once again. Only this time, Dorian Shen no longer acted as foolishly as in the previous life. He didn't jump down to save her himself, but merely ordered a young servant beside him to pull her out. Soaking wet from head to toe, Autumn looked at him trembling, choking out, "If you don't want me anymore, I truly cannot go on living." Autumn's weak and pitiful appearance moved the hearts of those around them. Yet no one noticed that Dorian's gaze upon her was cold to the bone, without even half a trace of sympathy. At this moment, Dorian was no longer the naive youth he'd been initially. In his previous life, he climbed step by step to great heights, his power eclipsing the court, below one person, above 10,000. Along that path, he'd witnessed far too much scheming and deception, mutual exploitation. This time, he saw clearly through Autumn's tactic of using suffering to gain his pity. She only jumped into the lake upon seeing him. Such a low-level ploy, yet in the previous life it had deceived him for an entire lifetime. The obsession of youth, loving but unable to possess, suddenly dissolved into clouds and smoke. That evening, Princess Xianxia suddenly fell ill. Autumn again clutched Dorian's sleeve, weeping pitifully. The princess was perfectly well. Why would she suddenly fall ill? She must be deliberately forcing you to return. If you leave, what if those who once harmed me come looking again? Dorian had heard these words before. In my previous life, after I drank the pregnancy medicine and had a reaction, the servants rushed to report, telling him to return to the manor. Autumn had said exactly the same thing then. At that time, Dorian had also thought I was merely feigning illness to trick him into returning. Because when the pregnancy medicine I drank was tested, it revealed no problems whatsoever. Even if there were problems, they could only be due to my own tricks. I had told him countless times that I would never use the child in my womb as a bargaining chip. But he never believed me. Only when everything replayed itself before his eyes once more did he finally truly believe what I'd once said. This time, he didn't remain in Autumn's courtyard but immediately rushed back to Shen Manor. The entire household was gathered in Princess Xianxing's courtyard. No one noticed a kitchen maid acting suspiciously. Dorian ordered her arrest just as she was attempting to escape through the kitchen's dog hole. Under interrogation, they learned she was a former servant of the Li Manor. It was she who had added poison to the princess's sedative broth. Before returning to the kitchen, she had used another bowl of broth to switch out the poisoned one. Thus, when the physician examined all the day's food, he couldn't determine what poison the princess had ingested. 2 months later, Autumn died in a small courtyard on the west side of the capital. By the time of her death, her entire face had rotted away beyond recognition. When I heard this news, I couldn't help feeling somewhat shocked. The poison Autumn suffered from must have been face-transforming powder, a toxic substance that causes the face to rot. Though extremely poisonous, if the antidote is administered in time, life can still be preserved. Only that antidote was worth 1,000 gold. A month prior, Autumn's courtyard had been robbed, her assets stolen clean, leaving nothing behind. From the day Dorian left that place, he never returned again. I heard Autumn threaten suicide many times, sending people to Shen Manor to plead, but Dorian's figure never appeared. When Princess Xianxia heard the news, she couldn't help but sigh, fear arising in her heart. Initially I thought that member of the Shen household was devoted and faithful. How did he change so quickly? A lady sitting nearby chimed in. Aren't men always the type to change hearts and alter faces? Though Miss Li just died, that young master of the Shen family can be considered as having pulled back from the precipice just in time. Now he's already been recommended by the Shen family for imperial recruitment. Quite a few people were visiting Shen Manor to inquire about marriage prospects. I heard even the minister himself regrets breaking the engagement. Princess Xianxia laughed coldly. This world is truly ridiculous. When women encounter trouble, their reputations are destroyed, never able to raise their heads again. Yet men need only turn around to be called reformed and repentant. As the words finished, the jovial laughter throughout the hall immediately fell silent. Princess Xianxia lightly rubbed her temples. Several ladies understood the hint and hurriedly withdrew. I casually tossed several pieces of feed into the lake, watching the colorful carp fight over it, then turned my head back to smile and speak with the princess. Your Highness speaks truly. This humble woman often thinks, if those chastity memorial arches are truly so wonderful, why don't we see any men hanging them above their heads? Princess Xianxia looked at me and also laughed. Dorian was ultimately someone reborn, so his progress through official ranks went extremely smoothly. He chose to align himself with Prince Heng, continuously receiving promotions, and finally entered the Grand Secretariat. In my previous life, Prince Heng supported the 6th prince, consort Xiao's son, to become crown prince. After His Majesty passed away, Prince Heng was enfeoffed as regent prince, his power eclipsing the court. He never made a losing move. Before long, a secret letter accused the prime minister of colluding with foreign powers. The emperor grew suspicious and ordered him imprisoned in the inner dungeons. He forbade Princess Yongning from entering the palace to plead for mercy. Princess Yongning had no choice but to ask me to bring the prime minister's clothing into the palace. In the palace, I encountered Dorian. I looked at him coldly. The prime minister lived his entire life with integrity and honesty. Never imagined he'd be framed to this extent. He answered indifferently. Either way, he'd eventually die due to His Majesty's suspicions. Might as well let me make use of him first. He looked at me intently. As long as I have power, everything I want will be mine. I laughed coldly. 2 lifetimes with power eclipsing all under heaven. What is there you haven't yet held in your grasp? He answered without hesitation. You, Song Camilla. In this life, I still wish to marry you as my wife. I reminded him dismissively, Dorian, I've already married as another's wife. We both know clearly he will never return from the battlefield. He smiled faintly, with a trace of mockery. When the prime minister falls from power, Princess Yongning will also lose influence. By then, who will be able to shelter you? From Dorian's gaze, I saw an unwavering determination. But he should know that even until the final moment, I absolutely will not bow my head. In my previous life, I fought against him for 20 years. Never imagined in this life I'd still have to continue this struggle. After leaving the palace, Dorian followed behind me the entire way. He understood clearly that I knew far too much. He absolutely couldn't allow me to ruin his grand schemes. Princess Yongning waited ready outside the palace. The moment she saw me, she quickly approached, grasped my hand, and asked worriedly, "How is he? Has he suffered any torture?" I gently squeezed her hand, shook my head and answered, "The Prime Minister is safe. Your Highness must take care of yourself. Right now, you are his only support." Princess Yongning glanced toward Dorian standing behind me, smiling coldly. Never expected he would help Prince Heng. Now that the Prime Minister has fallen from power, Prince Heng and Consort Xiao have formed an alliance. Even this palace is powerless. I raised my hand and used a silk handkerchief to gently wipe the tears from Princess Yongning's cheeks, bowing my head to whisper in a voice only the two of us could hear. "Your Highness, this humble woman never expected that Prince Heng supporting the 6th prince as crown prince would remind this humble woman of her own father." Princess Yongning stared at me in shock. Very quickly, palace guards from the gate approached, separating the two of us. Dorian's people stood guard outside my manor, confining me. 7 days later, at the imperial hunting grounds, the crown prince's horse suddenly went mad, eyes bloodshot red, frothing at the mouth, trampling death the young eunuch leading it. Prince Heng risked his life to block the attack, protecting the crown prince's life. That scene happened to fall right under the emperor's eyes. From that day forward, Consort Xiao fell from favor. The crown prince was confined within the eastern palace. The emperor's dragon body grew weaker by the day. Princess Yongning frequently entered the palace to attend to him. That evening, the emperor's medicine was poisoned. Prince Heng led troops in rebellion, marching straight to the main hall. The imperial palace sank into a sea of flames, red light blazing across the night sky. Dorian led the palace guards storming into my manor, his eyes filled with emotion as he gazed intently at me. "Once tonight passes, Prince Heng will purge all opposition. Only by following me will you have a path to survival." I looked at him calmly and said slowly, "Prince Heng truly risked his life for his only son. He even dares force the emperor to abdicate." Dorian paused briefly. "How did you know? How could you guess?" I curved my lips into a slight smile. Never imagined a mere speculation of mine would actually help Princess Yongning overturn both Prince Heng and Consort Xiao. Prince Heng has already led troops into the main palace. Princess Yongning cannot win. My hand silently reached into my sleeve, touching the ice-cold hilt of a dagger, and asked softly, "Tell me, if I die this time, can I be reborn once again?" He trembled, his voice going hoarse. Don't do anything foolish. I don't want to lose you again. Do something foolish." The dagger hidden in my sleeve was meant to take his life. Just as I drew the blade preparing to stab into his heart, an arrow cold as ice pierced straight through his chest. Dorian collapsed to his knees before me. Blood from his mouth and nose gushed out in waves, bright red as fire. He stared fixedly at the short blade in my hand, his gaze trembling faintly. I laughed, glancing at him. "What's wrong? You seem shocked that I wanted to kill you. Not far away, a soldier clad in armor, holding bow and arrow, stood motionless. One of Marcus's men. I was escorted into the palace. The rebellion had been quelled. Prince Heng was beheaded right before the main hall. With reddened eyes, I ran to Marcus's side, my entire body trembling as I choked out. Fortunately, my husband sent people in time. Otherwise this wife would not have kept her life. He embraced my shoulders, bowed his head to speak beside my ear, his voice cold as ice. I heard from Chen Ying that if he'd arrived 1 moment later, Dorian would already have died under your blade. Marcus saw through my charade in an instant. I was too lazy to keep pretending. I raised my head to ask him, "Why did you return?" His Majesty predicted they would rebel, so he secretly ordered me back to the capital for reinforcement. I didn't gamble wrong. In the end, the victor is still Princess Yongning. In this life, I've defeated Dorian. Before passing away, the Emperor entrusted power to Princess Yongning's hands. Princess Yongning ascended the throne, becoming the first empress in a dynasty's history. Thanks to his merits, Marcus was heavily relied upon and enfeoffed as regent prince. In this capital, everyone wishes to rely on the powerful. But no one knows how to choose people like I do. Prince Heng's remnants were very quickly purged clean. Before Dorian's execution, I went to see him one final time. His eyes were red and swollen, his voice hoarse as he asked me, "Camilla, between us, is there truly no possibility remaining?" I suddenly remembered that after I died in my previous life, my soul drifted through empty space. He sat before my coffin through the entire night. At that time, his eyes were just as red, just as filled with bloodshot streaks. At that time, his mouth kept muttering, "In the next life, be a good person. Don't be so vicious anymore." You're right. In this life, I'm truly not a good person. But precisely because of that, I was able to defeat you. When it comes to scheming, manipulating hearts, calculating strategies, I'm still no match for you. He laughed bitterly and asked me one more question. "Did you come today to see me off on my final journey?" I shook my head slightly. In my previous life, those letters of accusation that ruined your reputation weren't written by your confidence. I wrote them. I waited a full year after my death before reporting them to the authorities. Because I didn't want to implicate those around me, and also didn't want to meet you again on the road to the Yellow Springs. Today I came here only to tell you this. In the previous life, I also won. Dorian's complexion immediately turned deathly pale. He had thought I still retained some affection for him, but the feelings between us had long since turned to dust from the previous life. The eunuch conveying messages once said, "I wished to see me one time before death, wanting to personally apologize. Yet now that I've arrived, that apology cannot pass his lips." Before leaving the prison, I said to him coldly, "In the next life, if there is a next life, I will still be the one to bury you. I never once intended to forgive you. This revenge I've fully repaid. I have no need for your apology." Father was imprisoned in the cell right beside Dorian's. When Prince Heng plotted rebellion, he also contributed his support. Upon seeing me, he choked out a plea. "Save me. Save your father. You need only beg Princess Yongning and the regent prince once. They'll certainly show mercy and spare my life." I paused mid-step, looking straight into those clouded eyes, and smiled faintly. They originally planned to spare father's life as well. Hope immediately lit up in his eyes. Therefore, the decision to execute father was issued by me personally. The new empress and prime minister governing the nation in harmony truly are a rare couple during chaotic times. The court runs properly, the people live in peace. Only regretfully, like the previous dynasty, they still couldn't produce an heir. So they took my child into the palace to raise. That child's temperament doesn't resemble mine in the slightest. Perhaps because he's being educated by people far more virtuous than myself. I trust he'll certainly grow into an honorable gentleman of integrity, completely unlike me. A woman who lived by stepping over blood, step by step walking out from hell. Hearing him say this, I raised my eyebrows and kicked open the door, striding in. Marcus sat bare-chested, leaning against the bathing tub, steam curling around his handsome, cold face. I slowly approached, bent down to look straight into his eyes, and asked softly, "How does your highness intend to discipline this wife?" He raised his hand to grasp my chin, remained silent for a moment, then laughed faintly. "This prince has thought it over repeatedly. I fear the only way is to offer my body in repayment." I couldn't help but laugh softly. reaching up to unfasten the hair tie at the back of his head. Your Highness truly is someone who serves nation and people, willing to sacrifice so much. He reached out and pulled me forcefully into his embrace. Hot water splashed everywhere, soaking the screen and my robe hem. Outside the door, the night sky was pitch black. The lamplight inside the room glowed warmly. Meanwhile, in the courtyard, only the shadow of a minister could be seen fleeing in panic. Resting my head against his chest, I sighed softly. Well then, this title of widow, I won't keep after all. Later, he looked toward me standing beside the bathtub and asked gently, "You fought?" I nodded slightly. "I won," I answered in a low voice. His gaze revealed a trace of approval. "Not bad. The princess consort of the Key Prince comes from a military general's household after all." The Key Prince still wouldn't let it go, continuing to shout from outside the door. "How do you plan to deal with her? Today you absolutely must give me an explanation naturally. I'll employ proper household discipline." Marcus gently applied the golden wound medicine bestowed by the palace onto the faint bruise beneath my eye, his voice low and soothing. "Tomorrow I'll teach you a few moves. In the future, if you want to fight again, others won't be able to injure you." His indulgence reached a level even I found somewhat unbearable. "You must surely know that with everyone, I scheme and calculate completely. Why do you still treat me so well?" "Calculating, so what? What's wrong with calculating? In my previous life, I fought against my mother-in-law, fought against Dorian, ultimately earning the reputation of a venomous woman throughout the capital." Marcus's gaze darkened as he said in a deep voice, "Everyone who met my mother said she was pure, hearted and kind. Yet in the end, she was schemed against by the very wet nurse closest to her and died. That's why I killed that woman to avenge my mother. I like that you know how to calculate to protect yourself. By the way, you can also scheme on my behalf. What's wrong with that? If I hadn't met you, I'd probably still just be an unloved prince." The soldiers in camp all refused to follow my commands. I fear I'd have long since perished on the battlefield. In my previous life, Dorian always carried that arrogant, aloof demeanor, hating to his core how I calculated every move and step. Living through 2 lifetimes, this is the first time I've heard a man say he loves a woman who knows how to scheme. Marcus truly did love me. 20 years later, he and I lived together in peace and harmony. I originally thought, having lived 2 lifetimes already, seeking only personal safety and ease, I would never have my heart stirred by anyone again. Yet when he truly died in battle, I wept until my insides tore apart. That was the first time since my previous life when I lost my unborn child that I cried like that. 20 years sharing both sweetness and bitterness, he never once treated me poorly. Now with only me remaining, my heart was in such turmoil I couldn't find peace. Before dying, Marcus left me a team of shadow guards he'd personally trained. He stroked my hair, gently instructing them they must protect her well. Only then could she live long enough to spend all that silver. Later, when His Majesty fell gravely ill, those with ambitions to seize power and usurp the throne rose up. The favor His Majesty showed my son led to murderous calamity. Serena, Autumn's mother, was originally my mother's cousin. Before marriage, she often came to Song Manor to visit my mother. Those who once harmed me, not a single one would I spare. Before passing away, His Majesty summoned me to the palace. In the Great Hall, several elderly ministers all knelt in unison. This subject has never seen a woman so ruthless. His Majesty could absolutely not trust her. His Majesty only grasped my hand and said slowly, "If she didn't possess some scheming ability, I fear she'd have been killed before even marrying out." One elderly minister still wouldn't cease his remonstrations. "If she becomes Empress Dowager in the future, the new emperor's reputation will hardly convince the realm with wholehearted submission." I looked toward the kneeling elderly minister and smiled calmly. "Why not let this old sir help me bear this burden? Conveniently, you can retire and return home, leaving behind a name as a loyal minister protecting his lord." His Majesty laughed. "You will pass the throne to my son and enfuff me as Empress Dowager." I lived to 75 years old. My children and grandchildren were filial, generation after generation living in peace. Sitting in that high position, I spent my days listening to music and dance, painting and composing poetry, unbothered by the power struggles of the inner palace. The realm spread word that the Empress Dowager is benevolent and tolerant, her entire life tranquil and without contention. Never imagined that at life's end, I would earn the reputation of gentle and virtuous. The story ends here for now. If it touched your heart or left you thinking, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Please like, subscribe, and share Raccoon Tale to help more stories come to life. See you in the next tale.